Okay, so we want to start to look a little bit at some of the application questions that we might run into. We begin with this problem. The average income for a person with a bachelor's degree is given by the equation y equals a negative 0.417x plus 53. And then, as often happens in some of these applied problems, x and y will be tweaked so that we're not dealing with oftentimes large numbers. Since we're talking about years here, oftentimes with x we'll base that off of some base year. So x is the number of years after 2000. This also sometimes could be stated where x is years and x equals 0 is 2000. Two similar ways that can be going. Y is the average income in thousands of dollars. So instead of dealing with really large numbers for y, since it's oftentimes incomes in thousands of dollars, we go ahead and make that base amount. First thing I would recommend when you're doing these problems is take a moment and write out what each of the variables is. It says it in the problem, but I think it's important for you to have that written out. X is the number of years after 2000, Y is the average income in thousands of dollars. And those are kind of the filters that you have to filter all the information through. Information you're putting into the problem has to come through these filters, and when you get an answer from the equation, you then have to filter it through these two things. Think of them as kind of lenses that you filter through. And so let's begin with some questions. What was the average income in 2005? So here we're being given a piece of information. Well, in this equation, as you've learned from graphing previously, you need to know either x to find y or y to find x. We want to know the average income. Average income is y. So that means we must know an x value. Here they're telling us the year is 2005. 2005 would be 5 years after 2000, so we'd translate that to x is equal to 5. At this point, we'd go to our equation, replace the x variable with 5, and then solve for y. In this case, there's not much to solve. We just have to evaluate it. And when we evaluate it, we get y is equal to 50.915. That means people made $50? No, y is in thousands. Thousands would be 3 decimal places. You can think of it as if I took that answer and multiplied it by 1,000, or multiplying by 1,000 moves it 3 places. So the average income is $50,915. Pretty good income, right? Well, let's go to our next question. What does the y-intercept tell us? Well, the y-intercept is a point where this graph crosses the y-axis. Remember, y-intercept, we know the x value is 0, so they're essentially telling us to put 0 in for x. So we do that. When we do, we get y is equal to 53. Now, remember, that's an actual point. The point is 0, 53. The 0 is telling us our x value. The 53 is telling us our y value. So 0 is telling us that x is 0, or 0 years after 2000, so that's telling us the year is actually 2000. Remember, y is the income in thousands of dollars, so the 53 would actually be telling us that y is 53,000. And then we take those two pieces of information and put them together, and so we see that the income in 2000 was $53,000. So you might start to see a little bit of an issue here. People actually, on average, made less money in 2005 with a bachelor's degree than they did in 2000 with a bachelor's degree. So that leads us to question, well, how is income changing? Well, change in a problem like this relates to the slope. So that brings us to our next question. What does the slope tell us? Hopefully you've written the equation down. And since that equation is in slope-intercept form, we can read off that the slope is a negative 0.417. Now, what does that slope tell us? Well, remember, slope is the change in y over change in x. So we can think of that as a negative 0.417 over 1. So that's telling us that y is going to decrease, because it's negative, by 0.417 every time X goes up by 1. But what does a decrease of 0.417 mean? Well, this is where we have to go back to what X and Y mean. So if we go back to what X and Y means, X was number of years after 2000. Y was the income in thousands of dollars. Okay. So because Y is going down by 0.417, that's really telling us that the income is decreasing by 0.417 thousand, or $417. And that's the average income is decreasing by that amount. That's going to happen every time X goes up by 1. Well, X was years after 2000, so every time the year goes up by 1, or in other words, each year. So not a pretty picture here. The income's actually dropping. The income is actually dropping by $417 each year. Not a very promising situation, but that is what the actual data kind of indicates. That income is going down. The average income has actually been going down. And you kind of think about some of the things that happened between 2000 and now. Right, we had a big recession in 2000, starting really in 2009, and that we really are just finally now starting to come out of. So yeah, incomes are going to drop, and that's what's going on here. Okay, so this is kind of an introduction to some of the questions you can run into. In some of the future videos, you'll be actually looking at finding the equation first and then answering some of these questions.